Okay, onward to Harold. He will become King of England. I do have a little glimpse of him, and I also have, I don't know, Wikipedia doesn't really have a picture of William the Conqueror. His pictures seem to have been mixed up again on the images, so I don't know, I'm not really going with them right now. We'll look at Harold. And Harold, no, I actually had an image of Harold that there. So here he is. He's kind of got curly, soft hair. And actually, he doesn't look like he has much on top there, does he? Now, the thing with Harold is he didn't last long as King of England, but he is the major, the king of the time that William was conquering. Edward, the one before, the prior one, led up to the conquer. Here's Edward, led up to the conquer, but I don't believe at the actual final, ta-da, that he was in charge. So I'm going to read on about that. And anything else I've got here? Not really. Aside from, I did have, was it from Harold? Yeah, from Harold, as far as who is, no, there were no kings. He didn't issue kings into England, even after the after the conquest. And let's see, I believe William did. So I think that's why I had this page open. Yeah, we had William. And remember, before I was discussing there was a Henry I, King of England. Well, that ends up being his son. And also there is a William II, King of England. So he does have two kings as sons, as well a Duke of Normandy to keep and retain Normandy. So he did keep the power with his sons through. Gosh, I wish I had something, like image for you all to look at. That's Harold. Yeah, Harold. I don't know. I guess we could look at King Edward, the last of him. He did have kind of like a Santa Claus look. He was kind of cute in a weird, odd way, wasn't he? They did have some good images of him, and we owe that to who? To England, the artists of England. They were. That's a great one there. It's like a tarot card, Yeah, this whole series here probably was the King of Edward tarot cards. Did you get it Piccadilly or something? This one here, it's very, very good, very good. And he did have a robust beard. Look at this one. He really have him down there like Santa Claus. Kind of funny, almost German in a way, Germanic. If you look at the German kings. Now, what else have we got down here? Now, they're always pushing this guy, and I swear he's classed as every king there was, this one fellow. So watch the look of this one, because I believe he's listed as 5 other kings as well. Yeah, look at these are definitely gorgeous. Now, this is the Alame stock photo, so it does look like tarot. Yeah, and very white. He really went white. I believe he had a long reign. I'm not really reading much about that. Look at this. This is more like a Klimt, Gustav Klimt there. But yeah, so pretty much England is about to go off to William, and this will be the last major king, because Harold wasn't really classed as a major king. He was barely in power a very long time. If a year, I think it was that short, or even less. I will try to speed up here. I'm trying to talk not too fast because I know it's hard to understand, but and then I'm also trying to not talk too slow. So at the last sentence we were talking about he attacked his adversary Harold with the artillery of the church, denouncing excommunication against him and all his adherents. So next on. Though this concurrence of favourable circumstances had removed many obstacles which had opposed themselves to William's designs, by affording a colour of justice to his proceedings, and thereby dispelling the doubts of some who were entarred by, scruples of conscience. Deterred. They were deterred by scruples of conscience. I'm like, what the hell? Now they're interring with... No, just deterred, yeah. So they have conscience now. And from engaging in his cause. Yet one essential difficulty still remained to be obviated. This consisted in the means of raising a sufficient sum of money to defray the enormous expenses of so vast an undertaking. He at first had which accordingly met at Lillibon, but when he demanded their permission to raise the necessary supplies by means of a general import, they unanimously refused to comply with his request, from a judicious preference of the happiness and repose of their country to the dangerous gratification of their sovereign's ambition. For they plainly foresaw that, if William succeeded in his designs, Normandy would infallibly become a province of England, and that, if he failed in his attempt, the duchy must long fuel the effects of his defeat. I'm sorry, he didn't say fuel, because fuel wasn't even invented then. He must long feel the effects of his defeat. They therefore represented to him that the late wars, having nearly exhausted the principality both of men and money, they were so far from being able to attempt new conquests that they should ever find great difficulty in defending their territories against the attacks of any powerful invader. They added that though the claims of William might be founded in justice, they were not aware of any advantage that could possibly accrue to their country from the enterprise, nor were they obliged to serve in foreign expeditions, in which the interest of Normandy was not immediately concerned. The Duke, finding there was no probability of succeeding with the States, resolved on a separate application to the most wealthy individuals of the province, and beginning with those in whom he could place the firmest reliance, obtained by degrees the requisite sum for the equipment of his armament. That would be costly. The Counts of Longueville and Mortaine afforded him great assistance in this negotiation, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, brother to the Duke, fitted out 40 vessels at his own expense. William Fitz-Osborne, Count of Breteuil, and Constable of the Duchy, provided a similar number, and the Bishop of Mons supplied him with 30. The example of these noblemen was followed by many others, and the States, finding it in vain to persist in refusing the required assistance, as without it would be enabled to put his project in execution, at last consented to grant his request. William had by this time collected a fleet of 3,000 vessels and assembled an army of 50,000 chosen men, among which were more than 5,000 noblemen, 450 of whom were of the first rank, and the most celebrated were Guy, Count of Ponthieu, Hélène Ferjean, Count of Dole, Amoret, Viscount of Thouars, and the Lord of Vetre, Chateau-Giron, Gaël, and Lohiac, all of them Breton. The chief of the Normans were Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, and the Count of Mortagne, and his son Geoffrey de Rotrou. Roger, Count of Beaumont, and his son Robert, the Count of Longueville, with the lords of Avranches, Tucre, Étutteville, Arques, Gournay, and Saint-Sauveur de Cotentin. An old general of 80, who was resolved to terminate a life of glory in the field of honour. There was also Eustace, Count of Boulogne, Hugh, Count of Estable, William Fitz-Richard, Count of Évreux, William de Warrenne, Hugh de Grand Masnil, Charles Martel, Roger de Montgomery, and Walter Giffard. To these curious chieftains William promised the spoils of England, and as a reward for their valour, and pointing to the British coast, told them that was the field in which they must render their names immortal and procure themselves honourable establishments. William had collected his fleet early in the summer of 1066, but was prevented from sailing by contrary winds, and different incidents till the month of September, when it set sail from the harbour of Sainte-Valerie, and after a fortunate passage arrived at Peffeny in Sussex on Michaelmas Day. I guess there's a day, Michaelmas Day, Michaelmas, when the army was disembarked without the smallest opposition. As a large fleet which Harold had assembled, and which had cruised off the Isle of Wight during the summer, had been dismissed on a false report that William had discontinued his preparations. After publishing a manifesto as false as his claims were frivolous, he advanced to the vicinity of Hastings, where he was met by the English army, under the command of Harold and his valiant brothers. The fatal battle was fought on the 14th of October, and after an obstinate and bloody conflict, which lasted from morning till night, William, by an artifice, secured that victory which decided the fate of England. The death of Harold left this foreign usurper in possession of the field and of the kingdom, and the sceptre of Britain, which had been swayed by the Anglo-Saxons for more than 600 years, was now transferred to the hand of a Norman. In 1067, the power which William acquired by his new conquest afforded just subject of alarm to all the neighbouring princes, who repented, when too late, their own weakness in not opposing his efforts. King Philip, young as he was, conceived that a crowned vassal was an object of apprehension, and he loudly censured the regent, who had assisted the Duke of Normandy with money and troops. But Baldwin did not long survive this event. His death was a great loss to the kingdom, which he governed with consummate prudence, and is still greater to the youthful monarch, who now became his own master at an age when the understanding is generally weak and the passions are strong. Philip was then but 15, and according to the ancient law of the realm, the king was not of age till he was 21. It does not appear, however, that any other regent was named. The first expedition of the new monarch was into Flanders, whither respect for the memory of Baldwin induced him to carry his arms. It had long been a custom with the counts of Flanders to respect the rights of primogeniture, so far as to leave all their dominions to the eldest son, to the total exclusion of the younger brother. The regent left 2 sons, Baldwin VI, who succeeded him, and Robert, who, according to the romantic ideas of the age, was sent to seek his fortune on the Spanish coast. He landed in Galicia. And after making a considerable booty, was compelled to retreat to his ships and return home. He then went, as a pilgrim, to Constantinople, whither he was invited by some Norman gentlemen who had performed a design of making themselves masters of Greece, but, their project being detected, Robert turned back with a firm resolution of establishing himself in the vicinity of Flanders. He accordingly collected what troops he could and made an attack upon Friesland, which was then governed by Gertrude of Saxony, widow to Count Florent, and guardian to her infant son Thierry. The Flemish prince, though twice repulsed, renewed his attacks with such determined courage that the countess, fearing that he must finally succeed, offered him her hand with the county of Friesland, which he accepted, and from thence acquired the appellation of Robert the Frisian. In 1070, such was the state of Flanders at the death of the regent of France, a prince of strong talents and inflexible integrity. Baldwin VI, his successor, either from jealousy, ambition, or antipathy to his younger brother, resolved to deprive him of an establishment, for which he was solely indebted to his courage and good conduct. In vain did Robert sue for peace and solicit his friendship. Bent on war, he had recourse to arms, and a battle ensuing, he paid for his unjust and criminal attempt with his life. His two sons, Arnauld and Baldwin, being still in their infancy, were incapable of stopping the progress of the victor, who easily made himself master of his brother's principality. Despoiled of their inheritance, they fled with their mother, Richelde of Hainaut, to the Count of France and implored. So they fled to the court of France and implored the protection of Philip, who received them with kindness, and raising an army advanced against the usurper. But in a decisive battle near Cassel, the French were defeated, and the young Count Arnauld perished in the action. Robert, by no means elated with his victory, was still eager to obtain the friendship of Philip, who accepted the proffered alliance, and even consented to marry Bertha, daughter to his wife Gertrude, by Florence, Count of Friesland. So he's going. Well, we won't get into all that, but yes, daughter of his particular wife. Okay, so anyway, young Baldwin, being thus abandoned by France, was compelled to content himself with the district of Hainaut and the title of count, and to leave his uncle in the peaceable enjoyment of Flanders. In 1073, the Church of Rome was at this time governed by the famous Hildebrand, a man of low extraction, formerly a monk of Cluny, afterwards a cardinal, and at length, on the death of Alexander II, promoted to the papal dignity under the appellation of Gregory VII. This turbulent and aspiring pontiff, not content with the arbitrary exercise of his spiritual authority, laid claim to universal dominion, nor suffered his enterprising genius to be restrained by fear, decency, or moderation. His impious zeal engendered more insurrections and caused a greater effusion of blood. A greater effusion of blood than the ambition of the most sanguinary tyrants. Right. Sorry, I lost my place. He neglected nothing, says Pasquier, which either arms, the pen, or spiritual censures could effect, in order to promote the advantage of the papacy and the disadvantage of sovereign princes. He was the first who dared to advance the dangerous doctrine that the Pope had a right to depose emperors and to absolve subjects from their oaths of allegiance. At least such is the doctrine contained in the famous publication known by the name of Dictatus Papae, because it gave the particulars of the Pope's instructions to his legates. All the circular letters of this pontiff breathe the same spirit of arrogance. They contain repeated assertions that bishops are superior to kings and are made to judge them, a precept to which his practice was strictly conformable. He excommunicated and deposed Boleslaus, Boleslaus, King of Poland, of course, and even took from that country the title of kingdom. The Emperor of Constantinople also received an order from the imperious pontiff to abdicate a throne which he had usurped. The princes of Calabria, in order to afford the thunders of the Church, were compelled to take an oath of fidelity to the Pope and to hold their territories as fiefs of the Holy See. In his letters to Menas, Archbishop of Rheims, and to some other French prelates, he says, "Your king is a tyrant, unworthy to sway the sceptre. His life is passed in infamy and crime." These insolent expressions are followed by his usual threat of excommunication, but this was only the prelude to his daring attempts upon France. His legates soon received orders to exact from the French an annual tribute, a tribute of a silver denier for every house in the kingdom, which was equivalent to the Peter pence paid by the English. Philip, however, treated this audacious demand with the contempt it deserved. Spain was treated with still greater arrogance. "You cannot but know," said he, in his letters to the Christian princes of that country, "that St. Peter is liege lord of all your petty states, and that they are the sole property of the Holy Apostolic See. They had better be in the hands of the Saracens than not pay due homage to the Vicar of Jesus Christ. You must have learned from your fathers." Speaking to Solomon, king of the country, but just converted to Christianity. So this was in the letters of him speaking to Solomon. Here is the letter still. "That Hungary is a domain of the Church of Rome. Be just converted to Christianity. Be assured you will experience her indignation unless you acknowledge that you derive your authority from the Pope." Gosh dang it, I'm sorry, I skipped a sentence back. The Duke of Bohemia paid him an annual tribute of 100 marks of silver for permission to wear a mitre. Sardinia, Dalmatia, and Russia were, he maintained, all fiefs of the Triple Crown. "Your son," says he, in a letter to King Demetrius, "has declared that he wishes to receive the crown from our hands. This demand appearing to us to be founded in justice, we have given him your kingdom on the part of St. Peter." But Henry IV, Emperor of Germany, was more harassed by the daring pretensions of this turbulent priest than any of the other princes. Under a pretense that he sold ecclesiastical benefices and dignities, the Pope summoned him to appear at Rome, to answer the accusations that were preferred against him. Henry had just returned from a glorious expedition into Saxony when he received this strange citation. Instead of answering it, he assembled a synod at Worms, at which the pontiff was condemned and deposed. Gregory, on his part, convened a council and pronounced the following anathema: "On the part of the omnipotent God, I forbid Henry to govern the kingdoms of Germany and Italy. I absolve all Christians from every oath they either have taken or may take to him, and I excommunicate whoever shall serve him as a king." So the church is really getting involved in saying no to Henry. This sentence, for which our language can afford no epithet sufficiently strong to mark the infamy of the prelate who pronounced it, had influence enough. Such was the darkness and ignorance of the age. To arm the whole empire against its chief. Okay, so now they're going to arm the entire empire against its chief. Henri soon found himself surrounded by an army of rebels, who, with the Pope's bull in their hand, compelled him to promise that he would retire to Spires and there live in the capacity of a private citizen, without attempting to discharge any of the functions of royalty, till such time as Gregory should repair to Augsburg in order to preside at the court of princes and prelates who were to try their sovereign. To avert a sentence so degrading, the emperor resolved to ask absolution of the Pope, who was then at Canofa, near Reggio, with the Countess Matilda, who may be considered as the true cause of the divisions which prevailed between the imperial and priestly dignity. Henri accordingly repaired to that fortress, wholly unattended, with his feet naked and his body enveloped in sackcloth. He was stopped at the gate and ordered to fast for those days, for 3 days. They wouldn't let him eat. At length he was admitted to kiss the pontiff's feet on condition that he would show a perfect submission to his will and repair to Augsburg, there to wait his pleasure. I hope his feet were clean. But the Lombards, moved at the state of humiliation to which this young prince, who had frequently signalized his courage and conduct in the field of victory, was reduced by the impious arrogance of an aspiring priest, promised to assist him in the recovery of his dignity, provided he would break the disgraceful engagement he had just contracted. In consequence of this unexpected succour, the the face of affairs was speedily changed, and Gregory was besieged in the very fortress from whence he had recently given laws to the princes of Europe. Still, his courage was inflexible. He carried on his usual war of words, was lavish of his threats and excommunication, and had even sufficient credit to promote the election of a new emperor, in the person of Rodolph of Rheinfeld, Duke of Suabia, to whom Gregory sent a crown of gold with the following Latin verse, containing a stupid play upon words. Petra dedit Petro, Petrus diadema Rodolfo. As soon as Henry was apprised of this revolt, he hastened into Germany, where, notwithstanding the spiritual thunder of the Pope, who condemned him to have no strength in battle and to gain no victory, he fought and defeated his rival. The usurper, being mortally wounded by Godfrey of Bouillon, acknowledged on his deathbed that he was justly punished for having taken up arms against his lawful sovereign. The emperor then returned to Italy and laid siege to Rome. He took with him a new pope, who had been elected under his auspices at Mayence. This was Guibert, Archbishop of Ravenna, afterwards known by the appellation of Clement III. He was known by the name of Clement III instead of Archbishop of Ravenna. The city was taken, but Gregory escaped and went to end his days in exile at Salerno. Had this spiritual Alexander, whose ambition soared beyond the scanty limits of the world, lived in a more enlightened age, it is probable that he would either have been confined on the plea of insanity, or that his criminal enterprises would have met their just reward on a scaffold. In times of darkness and superstition, that was the most atrocious crime, when veiled beneath this specious mask of piety, acquire a different complexion, and are considered worthy of imitation and praise, is a fact that rather incurs a pity, that excites astonishment. But when the film of prejudice is removed, when the judgment ceases to be obscured, and the mind is no longer bound by local ties or private particularities and partialities, that then the infamy which for ages has attached to vicious characters should be done away by the mere force of words and the powers of sophistry, is a matter of deep concern, that leads us to lament the depredation, or at least the gross misapplication of genius and ability. That was one sentence. Hildebrand and Becket have both found a champion in the 18th century, a champion who has devoted his splendid talents not to the mere talk of palliation, but to the conversion of absolute crimes into active virtues. With regard to Hildebrand, it has been urged that he aimed at universal dominion, for the sole purpose of promoting a reformation of manners, which was generally wanting, and of enforcing and extending the precepts of Christianity and the practice of piety. Admitting this to have been his motive, his conduct was so far laudable. Still, however, the means he adopted, the execution of his plan, were inconsistent with his station, and detestable from their immediate effects. Besides, how can his endeavours to extend a despotic authority over all temporal concerns be reconciled with the express declaration of that being whose vicar he professed himself to be, that his kingdom was not of this world? Or how will the arrogant and presumptuous language of Gregory be made too square, with the meekness and humility of Christ? Can treason, perjury, rebellion, and murder be proper instruments for enforcing obedience to a God of mercy and peace? But we are told what we now consider as vice had formerly a different denomination, and that in appreciating crimes we should always consider the age and country in which they were committed. To this we reply, that truth and virtue are fixed and immutable, confined to no age, peculiar to no soil, attached to no party. Their precepts are plain and simple, correctly defined, and easily understood. Though sophistry may disguise, it can never subvert them. Their nature was, and ever was, is, and ever will be, the same. Were it possible to change it, the firmest bond of social harmony would be dissolved, and every crime admit of justification. The Abbé Valli has observed, not unjustly, that the misfortunes of Gregory may be chiefly ascribed to his ignorance of the proper boundaries of spiritual authority, and to his having arrogated to himself a power over temporal matters that Jesus Christ never granted, either directly or indirectly, to any of his disciples. This bold assumption gave rise to numerous wars that were attended with a vast effusion of blood, and a long train of calamities both to church and state. The dispute between the emperor and the sovereign pontiff induced all the sovereigns of Europe to take proper precautions against the daring and dangerous power of the Pope. Such precautions, if Pasquier may be credited, had long been adopted in France. We have had, says the author, from the earliest times, 3 propositions which have served us as a shield. The first is, that the King of France cannot be excommunicated by the authority of the Pope. The second, that the Pope has no jurisdiction or power over the temporalities of kings. The last, that the General and Universal Council is superior to the Pope. An insurrection of the inhabitants of Man, called William, or Man, the town, called William and William the Norman from England. They called on him to reduce the rebels to submission. This talk was no sooner accomplished than he was obliged to turn his arms against Ralph de Godet, a Breton who had taken refuge in the city of Dole, whither William pursued him, and laying siege to the place, swore he would not desist till he had taken it, and gained possession of his enemy. But he was compelled to violate his oath, for the King of France, together with Hoel, Count of Brittany, having sent a formidable body of troops to this assistance of Ralph, he was obliged to raise the siege, and relinquish his enterprise. Nor was this the only repulse which William experienced. An event that occurred about this time was attended with much greater disgrace and mortification. Robert, his eldest son, surnamed Gambaron, or Count Bos, from his short legs, was a prince who inherited his father's courage without his dissimulation. Being impatient of control, he was prompted to aspire to an early independence, and several circumstances had occurred to favour his design. When William received the submissions of the province of Maine, he had promised the inhabitants that he would appoint Robert to govern them, and previous to his first embarkation for England, while he was soliciting succour from the French, he had expressly declared that if his designs upon that country met with success, the prince should succeed him in the duchy of Normandy. This artful declaration was intended to quiet the jealousy of his neighbours, who were fearful that he would acquire too great an extent of territory. But when Robert, after the accession of his father to the throne of England, had demanded the performance of his promise, William answered that the numerous insurrections of his subjects and the threatened invasions of the Scots and Danes rendered his power in England so precarious and uncertain that prudence forbade him to part with his hereditary dominions, to which he might, perhaps, be finally compelled to retire. This evasive answer served his purpose for a time, but all those pretended obstacles being now removed, he was compelled to lay aside his dissimulation, and to confess to his son that it was his determination not to resign any part of his territories during his life. This explicit avowal increased the discontent of Robert, who made no attempt to conceal his displeasure, and was strongly suspected of having instigated Philip and the Count of Brittany to that opposition, the opposition which had compelled him to raise the siege of Dole with such precipitation. So his son Robert didn't want him over there in the Normandy anymore. At the length of the signal for war was given in 1079. The young nobility of Normandy and Maine, together with those of Anjou and Brittany in general, declared for the prince, who was privately supplied with money by his mother Matilda, and there enabled to support an unnatural contest, which during 3 years convulsed the hereditary dominions of William, and totally destroyed his domestic repose. Philip spared no pains to foment the division and to enlarge the breach which subsisted between father and son. I understand William wants Normandy because it's nicer than London. Anyway, we have William finding his authority in Normandy considerably diminished by the attachment of the Norman nobility of his son, was compelled to have recourse to England, where his tyranny had established his power on a more solid basis, and where the doctrine of passive obedience had been more successfully inculcated. That really is the word, inculcated. An English army, oh great, now we've got the English getting in an army here, was accordingly transported to the continent, and Robert, unable to withstand so formidable a reinforcement, was compelled to leave his father in possession of Normandy, and to retire to the castle of Gabaroy in the Beauvoisis, a retreat which Philip had secured for him. Here he was joined by a great number of French noblemen, who repaired thither with their vassals to signalize their courage under the command of a prince who was esteemed one of the best soldiers of his time. From thence they ravaged all the Vexin Normand and the Pays de Caux. So off we have now William is still maintaining Normandy. William, to put a stop to these incursions, pursued his son and laid close siege to the castle, which was defended with great valour. Before the walls of Gabaroy there passed many reencounters, which more resembled the achievements of chivalry than the operations of regular troops. In one of the numerous fallises which were made during the siege, Robert, perceiving an officer in the English army who distinguished himself by his vigorous exertions, rode up to him, and making a furious thrust with his lance, wounded and dismounted him at the first onset. As he fell, he called out for assistance, and his voice immediately discovered him to be the king. Robert, stricken with horror at the time, was about to accomplish, sprang from his horse, and falling on his knees, most earnestly entreated his father's forgiveness. So he thrust his lance, wounded and dismounted him at the first onset. He didn't realize it was his own father, the king, supposedly. William, stung with shame and indignation, did not answer the virtuous effusions of filial respect with an equal return of tenderness, but mounting his son's horse, departed for his camp, bestowing a malediction where a heartless, ferocious must have pronounced a pardon. He soon after raised the siege and returned to Rouen, where by the importunities, so he didn't kill him, he just kind of injured him a bit, whereby the importunities of the Queen and the interposition of his nobles, he was prevailed on to listen to a reconciliation with Robert, but he did not think it prudent to leave him in Normandy after his own departure from that country, and therefore took with him to England, under the specious pretence of entrusting him with the command of an army, which he sent to repel the incursions of the Scots, who had invaded England. So while he was dallying around in France, the Scots invaded England. In 1087, for some years, a perfect peace prevailed between the French and the English monarchs, which was at length interrupted by the account received by William of some idle railleries with which Philip had indulged himself at his expense. William, who had become extremely corpulent, had been confined for some years to his bed by sickness, which led Philip to express a hope that his brother of England would be soon delivered of his great belly and enabled to quit his chamber. Now, when he says great belly, I think they mean belai. Is something else there. I might stop this now. I'm at 5-6, but yeah, that was a kind of exciting. The ships that William was given, supported by so many. And now after, the Conqueror of Harold's gone, quite in one evening really, and just overnight they had that siege and it was done. So in recap, it was quite interesting that they were just hanging around in France a bit, Robert, now King of England, and Henry, and now there's a war starting from the Scots. So, oh yeah, and don't forget the Pope tried to get involved with the whole thing and say, give his piece of excommunication.